The recording has started.
All right, thank you. So this is our monthly towing task force meeting. It's about 2:05 p.m. On Wednesday, March 13th, 2024. So we'll go ahead and start the meeting. We'll go ahead and begin with our roll call. I'll go ahead and do that. We'll start with John Connolly. I don't think I've seen him yet. Captain John Hahn, I don't think is present, but I believe he has a sub, Sergeant Heathrow.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, thank you. Jennifer Henson.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Jim House.
Here.
Thank you. Dr. Pierce.
Sorry, I wasn't able to get my mic off. I'm here.
All right, thank you. Officer Pronsky.
I'm here.
Thank you. Brandon Rich. I don't think I've seen him yet. Jeffrey Reister. I've not seen him yet either. Nathan Riley, that is myself. I am present. Joyanne Rusha. I've not seen her yet. And Edward Schoenheit. I don't think he is here yet either. All right. Thank you, everybody. So let's see. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Looks like we got 6 members online right now. If a couple more come in, we'll have quorum and we can try to approve the minutes that were circulated. But we don't quite have that number yet, so we'll just keep an eye on it. And if it goes up, we may pause wherever we're at and get those approved, the minutes from the last meeting. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and move on to our agenda. So we've been through our roll call, been through our approval, we've discussed the approval of our meeting minutes from our February 28th meeting, but we don't quite have a quorum yet, so we'll wait for that. Moving on to administrative items. I had a couple things to bring up. Let me just bring my notes here. Give me 1 second. Just a reminder on the compliance affidavits. We did host our annual training during our last meeting on February 28th. So if you were present for that, I know we circulated, I believe Hadija sent out our compliance affidavits shortly after that, I think within a couple days after that training was over and our meeting was over. So if you got that in your email, again, we send everything to the state email addresses that you've been issued. If you wouldn't mind just downloading that and signing it and sending it back to us, we'd appreciate that. If you have any questions or anything, just feel free to let us know. But yeah, it's that's something they want for the department. So if you could please sign those as soon as you can and get them back to us. You can send them directly to Hadija. We'd appreciate that. Just also another reminder, we are still in the recruiting phase for the other 3 vacancies that we still have on this body. So we still have the 2 vacancies for the positions that are the ones that represent communities that may be disproportionately impacted by non-consensual towing, as well as the position that is related to a motor vehicle association. So my understanding is we've received some applications for those, but we're still kind of processing it. So hopefully we'll have some new people in here soon and we'll be up to full strength. I think that'll be helpful for all of us. So just wanted to give everybody an update on that. Okay, let me see. I think that might have been all the notes I had for administrative updates. So as part of the agenda, I put another item on here for kind of a more specific topic to discuss, and then we can move more towards an open discussion and any other public comments we might have. By the way, Hadija, do we have anybody sign up for public comment today?
No, we do not have anyone signed up for public comment today.
Okay, thank you. If somebody pops in, we'll address that. But we'll kind of see what happens. But yeah, again, I kind of split it up into 2 parts today. I had a more specific topic that I thought maybe now would be a good time to discuss, or rather discuss again. And then we can move on to open discussion where kind of anybody says anything that's on their mind, or any other more specific topics or concepts or points of interest we want to talk about. So the more specific topic I had, which is what I thought we could start with today, is in relationship to the tow rates, which again, we're responsible for making those recommendations to the PUC on what we think are appropriate non-consensual maximum tow rates for the commission to impose on the towing industry. But more specifically, and I know we've talked about this quite a bit over the past couple years. Some of this is to the benefit of some of our newer members, like Ms. Henson. The commission, basically for the past, more than 10 years, and I wish John was here to give some additional feedback on this topic, but typically what would happen is, every so often, maybe every 3, 4, 5 years, the towing industry, sometimes it was initiated by the towing industry, maybe at other times it was initiated by others, would come before the commission and essentially request that the towing rates be updated. And that was just kind of how it worked. So the rules would specifically outline what prices could be charged, or rather what maximum prices could be charged for various services like hook fees, storage, after hours fees, things of that nature. And so, the towing industry would often come around here and there to basically ask that those rates be bumped up from time to time. But if we go back to, I think it was about 2019, 2020, the towing industry came before the commission and basically made an argument on, this is an exercise that takes a lot of time and effort, all across the board. It is a lot of time and effort on the commission's part, on commission staff's part, on the industry's part. Basically anybody who was involved in these rulemakings, which, if anybody has participated in a PUC rulemaking, it at times can be a pretty laborious process. There's a lot of due process that goes along with it. So there's very lengthy comment periods, and then there's public comment hearings, there's decisions, there's appeals to the decisions, there's AG opinions that get issued later on, there's published dates, and there's just a lot of 20-day waiting periods peppered throughout the entire process. And so I think the argument coming from the towing industry at that time was along the lines of, we go through this every 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Why don't we just include something that kind of happens, in a little bit more of an automated process? And that's where the annual inflation adjustment mechanism was created. So it was part of a rulemaking that I think was finalized, I want to say in 2020, because I believe 2021 may have been when we first started doing this. But basically what we were doing is taking the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, and taking whatever the previous year's, overall general inflation rate was, and essentially just tacking that on to, whatever the base rates were. And, it compounds every year, and we've been doing it for a handful of years now. And the reason I figured this was a good time to bring this up again is because we're just about to do this again for the 2023 calendar year. We've adjusted our rules. I think the most recent time we did this was back in, I want to say it was December of 2022, but I think 2021, but I think it may have bled into the early part of 2022 as well. But basically, we adjusted it where, so the CPI rates that we get is from the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. They're the ones who put those figures together. And they pull from some of the federal information and statistics as well. But anyway, we look at that, and they update it every year in late February, give or take. It's usually in the back half of the month in February. And so when they post it for the previous calendar year. So this February, so just this last month, within the past few weeks, and I've been checking it, over the past probably 6 weeks or so, and it did finally post. And so at this point, pursuant to our rule and kind of the structure that's been created, we're going to be taking all the current rates that are being charged right now and have been charged over the course of the past year or so, and giving it that percentage bump based on what the inflation rate was, or at least what CDOLA has designated as the 2023 CPI inflation rate. So again, we're about to go through this exercise, and these new updated rates pursuant to the rules should be posted probably by the end of this week is when they're due. So those will be posted on the website. You know, we'll send out an email blast to all the towing carriers to let them know that the rates have been increased, and that's just what people are going to be charging for the next year or so until we do this again in early 2025. So on that topic, you know, I thought it was a good time because we're just about to go through this exercise again this year to just kind of discuss how we feel about it. We explored this a little bit, you know, in our report that we issued back in November of 2022, but I don't think we really came to any firm consensus on a couple things, which is I've always considered this to be split into two parts of the inquiry, which is first off, you know, do we as the towing task force even think that having one of these mechanisms in place is a good idea? First off, like, do we think it works? Do we think it's okay? Do you think it's, you know, creating and streamlining things in an appropriate way? So that's the first part of it. And then the second part is, again, is the current metric being used, which is that CPI figure that is populated by CDOLA every year, is that the best metric for the commission to be using? So again, I just want to kind of open it up a little bit for discussion and kind of see if anybody wants to jump in and, you know, kind of kick off the conversation now that I've provided kind of the historical context and kind of framed up the discussion. Anybody want to jump in and, you know, share kind of what you think about it? Because again, we're about to do this for, I think, the third time in so many years. So, you know, just kind of want to get a feeling for how everybody's thinking about it. Dr. Pierce.
If I could speak for two members who are not here, just to circle us back to some of the past comments. Mr. Connolly was suggesting that we use, I forget the exact name of the index, but I think it was a producer's index instead of a consumer price index. So it's largely for if you're in some kind of a producer sector, what are your costs looking like? Mm-hmm. And using that as looking at that just to see how well that's tracking costs. And work from there after we're looking at those. The other one was proposed by Ms. Rusha, and I forget the name of the indice, but it was an alternative to the consumer price index, and it was another one. A cost of living index or something like that. That she thought was potentially a lot more on point in terms of providing the kinds of costs that are relevant to what we're doing. And because both of them brought up those two indices, and I think we're the most familiar with them, I was really hoping that they could speak to those. But I know that was on our homework list to look into for a while, but we never quite got to those.
So, and thanks, Dr. Pierce, for sharing those comments. I agree. There were a handful of potentially alternative metrics or price indexes that we thought potentially could be maybe a better fit for tow rates specifically. Because again, the one we're currently using, or the commission is currently using through CDOLA, it's not really broken out in any particular way. It's just a flat figure for everything for the whole year. So it's not quite as specific to the kind of stuff we're talking about. You know, it likely includes, you know, things like fuel and, you know, vehicle costs and, you know, things that are relatable, but it probably, you know, factors in stuff that isn't relatable, like consumer spending or food, you know, things like that, you know, utility prices that might be able to connect. But Yeah, so again, I think that was just the best option that the commission had available at the time when they put that into the standard. But I do truly believe that the commission would be receptive to an alternative if the towing task force was to coalesce around an alternative. I think the commission would be very receptive to that. So especially if we've done the legwork and, pointed to, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 distinct reasons why that's the better option as opposed to what the commission's currently using. I think they'd be very receptive to that. The ones that I had, and I guess we discussed this back in November of 2023. So I think we had it listed to 3 primaries, which were the personal consumption expenditure, or the PCE, like you indicated. Yes, and then like you indicated, Dr. Pierce, the producer price index, the PPI, was another, and then the CPI-transportation, or the CPIT, as potentials for what the potential alternatives to what the commission's currently using. So it seems like, and I know we spent probably a good 20 minutes, 30 minutes, as a group back then, going through the websites of all these different alternatives and kind of trying to see what we thought, just at face value might be a better fit. And I think we narrowed it to the PCE and the PPI, because I think though at least one of those, if not both of those, do break out the data by different categories. And so because of that, we may be able to kind of create more of a streamlined version of it. As long as whatever we're recommending isn't too complex, then I think the commission very well might go for it. But again, I think we just have to make the argument on why it's a better fit, rather than just the more generic flat CPI rate that has been used, in past years. So
could I comment real briefly too?
Yeah,
it sounds like too, there's using the indices themselves here, and then there's using a subset of the factors that go into them. And it almost sounded like the recommendation was to use a subset rather than just the index itself. So I thought that might be worth exploring. The other one that I mentioned, I think if I recall, I don't think I was part of that meeting. It sounds like that was one I wasn't able to attend. But in a prior meeting, another suggestion I had, just because of worries about the COVID era being this little bump, was that we might be better off doing a running average rather than just an annual CPI or PPI or whatever, so that we're not getting that little outlier affecting the rates. So a running average would smooth it out a lot better. So those are just 2 alternatives, slightly more dialed in to dialing in some further considerations into how we do this.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of poking around a little bit in the PPI website. Let me go ahead and share a few links with all of you. So I'm going to stick some stuff in the chat here, a couple links if you want to follow them yourself and take a look. So that first one I put in there is the PPI. And I think we could maybe poke around in here a little bit and see what we're seeing. The other one here is the PCE. So if you want to open up, either or both of those, we can take a look. And actually, while we're going through, just so we're all looking at the same stuff, I mean, you can feel free to go in and kind of poke around as you will, but at least so we're all looking at something more uniform together, we could just all look here. So this is the PCE here. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so let me zoom that here. There we go. So this looks like you know, it's more of a month over month, but I'm sure we can, you know, work with like interactive data, for example. So we got GDP, fixed assets by industry, maybe. Let's try that. So yeah, as you can see, some of these are pretty, it can get pretty deep into the data. So we essentially have to know where to look to find what we're looking for. But yeah, typically, let's see. Yeah, and I guess I was looking for anything like more transportation in nature. I don't know if some of this is, it might be grouped in different ways. So, let's see. So let's see. Okay, maybe prices inflation. So there's a couple of different ways we could go into this. Excluding food and energy. I don't know that we'd want to exclude energy though, just because, you know, businesses use energy. So here it's broken out by quarter. Okay. But yeah, if anybody wants to poke around in that one a little more, moving to the PPI, I think this one, I think was a little more, if you go to interactive charts, you can click on different things. So you have like transportation here. So you can overlay the data for transportation and kind of see how it's gone up and down. Obviously things spiked pretty high, but in 2022, but has kind of come back down since then. I did have somebody ask me once if the metric that's currently being used, which again we're using the CPI out of CDOLA, if it got returned in a given year as a negative percentage, would that mean the price would go down? I've been asked that before, and the answer I had was yes, it would, because again we overlay that percentage over the current rate and adjust accordingly. It doesn't say anything about whether it's positive or negative numbers. So, and I still think that the way that mechanism is laid out, that would be the case. So yeah, theoretically, if you had a number that was being used that was in the negative in a given year, yeah, that would mean the corresponding rates would go down, you know, that percentage based on what it was at that time. So, and what the figure was. So if it was, you know, you're charging $100 for a particular service in a given year, and then you have a minus 2% rate for the previous year, then that service would go down to $98. That's how I see that working. So if that, you know, just some additional context there. But yeah, so you can click on the different ones here. You got energy here that you can overlay. Yeah, like I said, transportation. So you can kind of see, wonder if you can average it out. Oh, yeah, because this is 1 month. Let's see. So there's 12-month. And you can select and deselect different ones. So you can get rid of the total and just do energy and transportation, for example. And you can kind of see how that overlays. So the red is transportation, the blue is energy. So, and you can download, it looks like. So here's some other numbers here. So if we scroll down, let's see what's this for. This is, okay, so yeah, the different categories. So you got transportation here, energy here. So you can go down to, 2023. Might have to average some of it ourselves, or again, it would all depend on how we would recommend it. So you can see some of these figures and how they work. So the CPI, just so everybody knows, the CPI rate that's going to be applied when we adjust the rates later this week, it's right about 5%. So I guess the question is, is one of these other metrics more appropriate? Because maybe, again, when you're not factoring in things like food and, some of this other stuff, if all you're factoring in is things like, transportation related stuff and energy and, stuff you can actually link to a tow carrier business, what all would we overlay onto that, and what would that in turn be removed from the metric that's currently being used, I guess would be the question. Ms. Henson, do you have any thoughts on any of this? I mean, you operate a towing carrier, so do you have any thoughts on, some of this data and what potentially you think is the most applicable to this kind of an exercise?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm just I didn't know where these rates came from. So I'm just kind of learning from you, like where all of this comes from and how they get it. Cause I really didn't have any clue. I didn't know that's what they based it on. I just knew all of a sudden the rates started changing, and for years they hadn't. And all of a sudden in 20, rates started raising, and I wasn't 100% sure why. One thing being a tow company owner is we don't get a lot of information. We get some, but we don't, like, a lot of it is not easy to come by. So we don't really know why things are happening or why they happen unless we research it and figure out, and then how to research it is hard too. So I am learning right now. I really don't know. I mean, I think for sure that food and things should be incorporated to it. On our company, I can't talk for everybody's, but we're a commission-based company. So our drivers get paid off of their commission. So the more they make on their calls, the more money they make. It's not an hourly rate thing. So if food is high, their call has to be higher for them to feed their families. So it does base off of food too, and food is very expensive right now. So I know that's one thing that we are having issues with in this city anyways, is that food is very expensive. Also, I don't know about anybody else either, but we do buy snacks for the drivers and food for the drivers and drinks and Gatorades and all that. Being the company owners, we try and provide things for them too. I always have snacks. I always have drinks. And when it's expensive, it's hard for us too. So I think whatever rate we're using, we do need to figure those kind of things out that to take food into consideration.
Sure. Jim, I'll get to you in just a second. I just wanted to share. So what I just pulled up here, this is what is currently being used by the commission.
Okay.
So again, it's the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, the Division of Local Government. Again, they run the inflation for Denver, Aurora, Lakewood. So Denver metro area is probably a better way to think of that. For the CPI. And again, it does take data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so the BLS. That's what some of these are based on. So basically they just, run the data, crunch the numbers, and they spit out a annual percentage. So it looks like this. So 2023 CPI value 320.300, percentage change 5.215. So like I said, about 5%.
So it's going
last year it was 8.
Okay.
Year before that it was 3.5. Year before that it was a little under 2, almost 3. I mean, you can go back, handful of years, almost 10 years, to kind of see how it's changed over time. Obviously, the last few years have been bumped up more than the 5-6 years before that. But anyway, so this is this is what's current. This is the metric that's currently being used. And so, you know, again, that's kind of the whole concept behind the exercise is this is the data. We essentially have a percentage change, and yeah, there's a value in there, but it's not super easy to interpret what that means. And so I think just some of the comments that have been made over the past couple of years is that, you know, is there a better way to do this? And so again, this obviously is a very simple way for the commission to do it, but is it the best way? And that's, I think, what we've tried to kind of talk around a bit over these past couple of years. But again, like I said, you know, we're about to go through this exercise again based on this change right here, which is going to be going into effect here shortly. But anyway, just wanted to share that additional context. Jenny, did you want to finish up and then we'll go to Jim?
Yeah. Did they take into consideration anything about with the new laws being passed, the amounts that we are not getting paid now? That's also taking a hit from like with the payment plans, all the money that we are actually not bringing in. Do they take into consideration anything like that? Or if we have to hire a collections company to collect that money, the collections is taking 30% of our funds that we usually would be making. So we're actually taking a hit there too. Do they take into consideration of the percentage of like, that may be the percent they're upping it, but with at least 30% of non-debt of people not paying, and we can't collect that 30% because it's through collections now. They take into consideration about that.
Well, and I think the commission would take into consideration whatever the industry feels like they need to bring up. And so obviously we're kind of still in that, you know, multi-year transitionary period where it was shifted away from vehicle owners being solely and fully responsible for the entire tow bill in order to get their vehicle released. And obviously when we're talking about specifically residential PPIs, you know, that's been kind of softened a bit where now they can get this release without full payment provision, which has been in place for coming up on 2 years. And so, yeah, I don't know that it's incorporated into anything that's currently on the table, but that's the point is, you know, that's kind of what we're here to do, is to explore some of these more nuanced issues and go to the commission and give them suggestions on how potentially to account for these types of things. And so, no, I think you make a good point, you know, and I've certainly heard quite a bit from towing carriers over these past 2 years about what you just explained. You know, people coming and getting their vehicles collected using that mechanism and then never seeing anything after that. So I've heard plenty of feedback from towing carriers about that. But yeah, no, I think that's exactly what we're here to do, is to discuss some of these nuanced issues, both from the towing carrier side and from the consumer side.
Yes.
So yeah, while that was, you know, a boon to certain vehicle owners and consumers, you know, that they were able to get the vehicles out cheaper than they had in the past. You know, again, I've heard countless stories just like yours, Ms. Sensen, about people just, you know, not being able to follow up with how that mechanism was kind of, I think, intended to be set up. So anyway, Jim, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to give a little bit. So I was part of the task force when we implemented the CPI adjustment. And the main reason was because, you know, it took us 2 years to even come up with those rates. And it had been many years before there was any change in those rates. And I'm not sure, 10 years, Nate, prior to the CPI adjustments?
Well,
It'd
yeah.
been a long.
Yeah, and again, we would go through, the commission would go through this exercise every, John would probably tell you every like 4, 5, 6 years.
Right.
And again, the as a lot of you might know already, the rulemaking process that the commission follows, you know, in accordance with, you know, its standards and rules and everything, it's not a short process. It takes a while. So for example, you know, the towing rules that we have been going through was introduced back in February of last year. And the rules still have yet to be finalized. So it again, depending on the substance of what is being changed and how much people are engaged. It could lead to multiple hearings being scheduled. That could be months worth of delays. You also have, due process considerations as well. So if you have somebody who wants to file an appeal to whatever the judge comes up with in regards to what kind of rules are going to be adopted, that delays things a bit because now the commission gets involved. And then, whatever the commission ultimately decides, that can then be appealed. So again, stuff can just inevitably at times get stretched out for longer and longer. So, but go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, well, and I believe, our decision, on the task force, when we implemented the CPI, was kind of the middle of the road one. And that would give at least the adjustment for the higher, if there was an inflation year, a quicker response to the carriers to be able to, for a rate adjustment. So, and that, I believe I remember we chose CPI because it was kind of the middle of the road one compared to, because we did look at those other indexes back then.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that's a good point. Thanks for sharing that, Jim. And I know one thing I've said multiple times over the last couple of years is, while I do think the whole annual inflation adjustment, using the CPI or whatever metric really, is an innovative idea and something I don't think we've seen a lot too much in the past from the commission in different industries where rates are regulated. I think it's interesting and, like I said, an innovative concept. But and I think I feel like a lot of people would think that as well, even now, had 2020 and all the ripple effects from 2020 not happened. So obviously, and I've said before, like, these last few years is probably the worst time they could have tried something like this out, because all people see is the big giant inflation percentage spikes and people are reacting to that. But, if you go back prior to 2020 and you see 2019, it's less than 2%, 2020 even was less than 2%. But then you see these, it just keeps spiking. Had it kind of stayed within this 2 to 3% range, for these past 4 years, I don't think people would really look at it the same way, but that's not what happened. And, we have dealt with some inflationary spikes. And so, we're obviously reacting to that. So, but, it's just another piece of the puzzle, and we're just trying to figure out, what is the best way to go about this. Joanne, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. So, if this might be something that you could address or anyone if they know, but like right now, who has the statutory authority regarding any potential additional fee that could be levied for non-payment of the towing fee? Does that make sense? Like, if something is going to a collections agency, I'm not as familiar. Can they? I mean, I know they can also levy some sort of surcharge, but is that regulated in statute? Is there a maximum, and or does under current statute does the commission have the authority to set a late fee?
Well, my understanding, so I assume you're referring to what I personally refer to as the release without full payment provision.
Yes.
Of the new statute. So that's under 4010.1 4055D. Well, 5C, and then it goes into D as well. But basically, my understanding is that the intent of this was really not to necessarily charge any additional fees for utilizing this mechanism. However, I can definitely see the other side as well, because when it's not really very thoroughly explored within the statute exactly how a towing carrier is supposed to go about collecting the balance after the fact, but it does admittedly refer to two specific recourses, and I don't think it's limited to those two recourses, but it's the only two that's listed in the statute, which is, well, what it says is the towing carrier may use the form, that's the form that the commission created and that the towing carriers use to facilitate the mechanism, to take reasonable action to collect the debt, including initiating a court action or using a collection agency. So those are the two, options that are specifically outlined in the statute. Again, I don't think it's limited to just those two options, but those are the ones that are kind of pointed out to and alluded to in the statute. Now, obviously, debt collector and some type of court, whether it's a local civil court, municipal level, district level, whatever it might be, they have no tie-ins to the PUC. So they are avenues that would be external to our agency. So similar to, for example, if somebody calls our office and wants to file a complaint against a towing carrier or really any carrier that we regulate, and they're claiming some kind of damages, we will provide them with the information for the relevant insurance related to this carrier, but that's kind of where our assistance ends, at least as it pertains to the damages. That's something where they have to pursue what we would refer to as an external remedy. And so that's them going outside of our agency to try to get some kind of a positive result in their favor. So I kind of look at, the pursuit of the balance in these cases in a similar mindset, just because that's how they outline it in the statute. So basically they're saying, hey, if a towing carrier wants to use a debt collector, or they want to pursue some kind of a civil judgment for whatever remaining balance there is, whether it's, $200 or $500 or $2,000, whatever it might be, these are two potential avenues to do it, both of which are external to the PUC. So that's why we've kind of stayed mostly hands off on how towing carriers are to go about pursuing that debt after the fact. I think we've tried to clean it up and eliminate some of the gray areas within our rules, which admittedly are not effective yet, but it is something that we talked about quite a bit in our public comment hearings last year for the towing NOPR. So hopefully it'll be easier to go about it. But yeah, in regards to what can be charged or additional fees and all of that, which kind of goes back to my original point, which was that I've never known there not to be some kind of associated fees with either a debt collector or a court action. And again, those are specifically outlined in the statute as options for securing that additional balance. So I guess I wouldn't go as far as to say, there's no additional fees or whatever that can be charged when using those mechanisms, again, because the statute specifically says they are mechanisms that could be used. So it's kind of like almost a yes and no answer. Like I don't think a towing carrier can just slap, penalties and fees on top of the balance. Like I think that probably would be inappropriate. But having said that, if they're taking, again, a good faith effort to try to pursue that balance, that outstanding balance, then I think that puts things, I think, in a different kind of a light. Yeah, Ms. Henson. You're muted.
When we do our payment plans, the customer draws out their plans. We don't really have a way they have to do it. We say, how much can you do? And they say $50 a month. Okay, well, you owe $250. We're going to go from now to however many months it takes you to pay it off. And we don't we just hope that they'll pay, and we'll call them and we'll send them, notices in the mail. If they don't, that's when we send it to collections. So if they pay through us, there's no fees or anything at doing a payment plan. It's only if we send it to collections, then collections adds interest or whatever they add to it because that's their policy. So that's when it's taken out of our hands into a different company's hands that has different policies. And then it goes into the collection agency rules and regulations instead of our rules and regulations. So it's totally a different statute. We don't even follow anything they do. Now it's out of our hands and into theirs. So I feel like we are, we're not charging anything when it's in our hands, and then it goes from our hands and it's their rules.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable position to have, in that particular situation. I think just based on everything I've heard, it sounds like the intent from the legislature of them creating this new mechanism was not for the consumer to necessarily be charged extra, but at the same time, again, if pursuing that balance through, so I think how you laid it out is pretty apt, actually, in that you're basically saying, hey, if they decide to, make that good faith effort and repay us the balance, by negotiating said payment plan, $50 a month for 5 months, for example, and they're sticking to that, then that's what they pay, and then it's over.
Right.
Great. So, but if they're not operating in a good faith way and they're not responding to that balance in a way that could be interpreted as a good faith effort, and it needs to be pursued more officially through things such as a debt collector or a court action, as alluded to in the statute, then in that case, it's just kind of however it ends up working out. It sounds like. So
Right.
I get that. I get that. Dr. Pierce?
Thanks. Actually, from what Ms. Henson brings up, I think it would be appropriate for us to look further into this, just because the way I'm understanding it, the rates that are currently as they're charged are based on not factoring in these extra just processing costs, and it sounds like the old system, it was basically the processing cost was the cost at the desk of picking up the car, and just paying for the labor and whatever paperwork that needs to go be done at that point of service. And now with the I forget what you call it about the bill, but now that there's a payment plan that's possibly in there. There's non-payment follow-through services. There's turning it over to a debt collector. All of those steps in the process add administrative costs, add paperwork costs to the net cost of processing these. So it seems to me fair to actually, think that this adds an average operating cost into the picture that wasn't factored in before. So it seems to me fair to look at those costs. The other comment I had was that this also circles back to the legislation that is happening currently, and a section of the current legislation, I think, had to do with registration requiring a survey that could be set up by PUC, and we didn't bring this up last meeting, but I thought that was an interesting component, and that was something we might be able to weigh in on at some stage, which is a topic that we had mentioned before, trying to get a survey as a mandatory part of the registration renewal, so that we can collect some data. And this is a very nice example of the kind of data that would be helpful to have.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Dr. Pearson. Ms. Rusha and Mr. Howes, we'll get to you in just a second. I don't want to get too far off topic, because I think we had a pretty good discussion going, but yeah, no, that's a good point. And yeah, my understanding is there is something in that legislation, that pending legislation, that would allow for the commission essentially to make, as part of its permit, issuance process, its permit application process, additional information from the towing carriers. So it kind of hits on a few points. I think it leaves it mostly open-ended, where the commission could kind of, ask for a variety of different things, but it does allude to certain things like, the number of tow trucks they have, or, what they're charging for certain types of services, or, how many tows they're conducting in a given, time period, and, what categories of tows are they. So I think it kind of hits on quite a bit of what we hit on in our survey back in 2022. So it seems to follow that quite a bit, actually. It's actually pretty succinct with what we did back in 2022 as a group. And so I found that interesting. And I think while I don't necessarily think it's something that needs to be included in statute, I think the commission could probably do that on its own, under its own, statutory authority and rules and all that anyway. Obviously having it in statute, just gives that extra cover to actually apply it in a certain way. So yeah, I think that's interesting. And it could lead to something pretty good where all of a sudden now, the commission is in possession of some of that demographic data and more tangible operational data, like how big are these operations? How many trucks do they have? What kind of tows are they doing? What percentage of the tows that they're doing are in the law enforcement ordered tow category? How many are in the PPI category? How many are in the consensual category? All of that could be, I think, potentially streamlined in a way where, that data feeds into some kind of a, almost like a master database or a master spreadsheet or something where we could use those figures to try to come up with some, ideas of, where the work is and, what kind of a percentage of the overall licensed towing carriers are engaged in what type of work. So I think that could be very helpful. And I know it's something we've talked about over the past these last couple of years. But yeah, obviously if there's something in statute, it's going to make it, I think, easier to get something like that incorporated and get the towing carriers on board with submitting that, especially if we're tying it to their permits. So anyway, thanks for that offshoot, Dr. Pierce. Ms. Rizha.
Thank you. So I had now I have a clarifying question, or just to make sure I understand this correctly. So my understanding is that right now under statute, a towing carrier cannot charge a fee to, I can't remember what we just called that provision, but to release a vehicle without full payment. Did I misread or misremember? I thought that was like clear in statute that a person, like the towing carrier couldn't charge an extra fee because the person couldn't pay all up front. And I know that's separate from debt collection, but I just wanted to make sure that was correct.
So I don't know if I'd go as far as to say it's, super clear in the statute that no fee or anything can be charged. Again, it's the statute itself and the mechanism that was created through that statute is pretty broad. And so it doesn't really get into some of these more nuanced conversations that we have about how it's actually supposed to work. I think some of it was, to a certain extent, maybe left up to interpretation, or maybe that's just the way the language got put in. But, again, this was the subject of significant discussion in our public comment hearings that we had last year when we were refining our rules. And as a result, the rule that we created to capture this new mechanism has been, at least in a certain light, been streamlined in a way where basically it's made clear that really the only thing that a towing carrier can require one of these individuals to do is to sign this form, which is mandated by the statute. And it's one we designed way back in August of 2022 for this specific purpose, and sign that form and pay either the 15% or the $60, whichever is less. And if they do those two things, the towing carrier has to release the vehicle. Like they can't mandate a payment plan. If they mutually agree to one as part of the process, that's fine. But they can't say, well, I'm not releasing the vehicle until you create a payment plan with me. No, that doesn't go. And our new rules capture that. So kind of in keeping with that, again, while I wouldn't go as far as to say it's clearly set out in the statute that, absolutely no fees can be associated with that, because otherwise the whole pursuing this through debt collection or some kind of a civil court wouldn't really work very well, because I don't know that statute somehow is going to override what the court is used to doing, and similar with the debt collectors. So again, that would just confuse things, I think, even more if there was that very clear statutory prohibition on charging fees. I think that would just confuse things even more. But at the same time, I think that is kind of the expectation. So, as Ms. Henson indicated earlier, if they come up with a solution that's advantageous for both parties, both for the towing carrier and the consumer, and they both agreed to it and they're both sticking to it, then yeah, there really shouldn't be any additional imposition being put on the consumer. I think that's a pretty valid expectation.
So if I could clarify, so my understanding was that the towing carrier couldn't charge a fee for a payment plan, like the towing carrier couldn't be that party, right? Because that would be like an additional fee that the commission didn't authorize. So that's how I was reading it, but I could see how that could be interpreted like. And so then the follow up to that was, or the other comment question was, like, is there a general statutory provision, I'm assuming, I'm just not as familiar, that regulates the and I'll just use the example of debt collectors, that maybe we need to become familiar with, so that we, even though they're not under this jurisdiction, we have a sense of what that picture looks like for when a towing carrier, you know what I mean? If they go down that path, does that make sense? Because
Sure.
I'm not familiar. Like, can a debt collector say, oh, you owed $160 and I'm slapping an $86 fee plus a percentage plus a late charge, but maybe they bought that debt for pennies on the dollar. I don't know. So I thought maybe that would be good for us to have a sense of, it in the next month or so, because that's kind of part of the picture.
Yeah, sure. No, that's and I think you make a good point. One thing I would say is that, I mean, and I definitely am not opposed to, learning a little bit more about how debt collectors work, or how, how something might look through the context of a civil court action. Maybe Ms. Henson has experienced that, where she kind of has gone after people for outstanding balances and stuff. Maybe she knows a little bit more about, how the court fees work or any of that. Maybe she's been privy to that in the past. I definitely not opposed to learning more about that, just so we have that additional context. One thing, Ms. Henson, do you want to share something about that real quick, and then I can finish my thought?
Yeah, it's like I just actually found a collection agency last week, one that would actually take our kind of calls, because our people are so unfindable. I couldn't find one. I had one a long time ago, and they canceled our contract because our people are unfindable. And so I actually found one locally last week, and it is all in here. I just signed the contract yesterday. And so it is a certain percentage rate. Like, I think it's off to read through here, but they do have it listed on here of what the late fee or percentage rate is. And it was like the legal amount. Like, so there's every state sets a legal amount of what they can charge, and it just goes off of the legal amount. So I think that's pretty common for every state, and every collection agency goes off the same thing. So I think that's just kind of a common fee. I'll find it and let you guys know what I find, but I know it's in this contract somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful, just to have that additional knowledge, if nothing else. The rest of my thought, and then I'll get to you, Mr. House, is one thing, and I think this may be kind of a more indirect way to get to, I think, what you were thinking about, Ms. Ruscia, which is about, is there a way to preclude a towing carrier from assessing some kind of fee to, like, set up a payment plan or whatever else? One thing I can tell you is that, especially in our Rule 6511 for the PUC for rates and charges and things like that, kind of peppered throughout that rule, and it may even be in some adjacent rules, there is language about certain types of tows not being privy to any additional fees or charges that are not specifically outlined in statute or in rule. It's just very generic, kind of all-encompassing language. And basically, the way we put it out there is, hey, listen, if you're going to engage in this particular brand of towing, then if it's this type of tow, you can charge, A, B, C, and D. Or if it's this type of tow, maybe it's like 5 categories you can charge, and then there's rates, and then the inflation adjustment, all of that stuff. But again, it almost inevitably seems to have that canned language in there about, a towing carrier, engaging in this kind of tow should not be charging any other rate or fee or anything other than what has been outlined in a statute or in a rule. So basically, if you can't find what you're trying to find in some statute or some rule, you can't charge it. So I'll give you an example. I had a towing carrier, this was years ago, probably 5 years ago, call me, and they were on a rotation for a law enforcement agency, and they were impounding vehicles. And at one point, the law enforcement agency had asked them to charge a particular fee when people were collecting the vehicle, which then on a monthly basis, the towing carrier would essentially cut a check to the law enforcement agency for those collected fees. And when I did a little bit more digging on it, I found out it was essentially some kind of a service or administrative fee that was being charged by the law enforcement agency. But because it was the towing carrier that was releasing the vehicle, they were essentially just tacking it on to the end of the bill, assessing it to them, and then, you know, over the course of the month, based on what the fee was and how many tows they accumulated during the month, they would then just cut a check from their revenue over to the law enforcement agency so that they got whatever fees they were trying to collect. So essentially, the towing carrier was acting as a surrogate for the law enforcement agency for a particular fee being collected. And I told them, I said, that is not appropriate. You cannot do that. And so it's this kind of maybe the same concept here, where if unless something is specifically allowed to be charged, either in a statute somewhere or in a rule somewhere, unless you can pinpoint somewhere that says, yes, I can charge this, then you're rolling the dice on if we find out and we, you know, cite you for it. So anyway, so that's the case with that. Jim, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So Nate, so when for the less than full payment release, does the consumer have to sign anything, a promissory note?
I don't know if I'd call it a promissory note. It's essentially, I think it's more akin to an attestation or maybe an affidavit.
Acknowledgement of payment. Or
basically. And I have heard towing carriers refer to it as a promissory note before. I don't know if it meets all the criteria to actually be considered that or not. But yeah, it's essentially laying out a form, and I can even show it to y'all if you want to see it.
While you're doing that, so, and I do believe the Attorney General just recently ruled that, I mean, unless you are a licensed financial corporate, you know, lender, you can, the towers cannot add interest or anything to it. Is that correct? I thought that was a deal with the Attorney General just the last couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, there was some discussion about that. I didn't fully understand all the legal nuances of it, but yeah, basically, based on some of the filings we've had in our public, you know, rulemaking process, it seemed very clear that the Attorney General's position is, yeah, no, they can't essentially create the, you know, they referred to it as like a loan-based program.
Right.
And they essentially said, yeah, no, you can't do this. So my understanding is towing carriers aren't doing that anymore in response to that. So,
well, that's, I hope they're not doing it. I mean, not for
right.
that. Yeah.
But anyway, you can see the form here. So this is the form, again, we created back in August 2022. I personally drafted this form. And it hits on a lot of the key points that are outlined in the statute as well. So it's a lot of the language is exactly direct from the statute. So, but basically, you know, obviously we had to include some other stuff in here, like vehicle information. Whoever is collecting the vehicle, they put like their name, their address, their phone number. If they have a driver's license number, they put all that on. Again, it's, like I said, I would refer to it as an attestation, that center part there, which covers, you know, how basically them essentially confirming and acknowledging how that statutory mechanism is supposed to work. So, for example, in the statute, excuse me, it specifically says that knowingly providing false information on the form is unlawful. It says that in the statute. So we wrote it here too. So again, they're essentially signing it and acknowledging it. And then the towing carrier, they enter their information down here. And then information regarding the payment is here. So you have the initial amount paid. So whether it's whatever the 15% was or the $60 goes here, whatever the remaining balance is after that amount is taken out. And then if they make a subsequent payment or maybe multiple subsequent payments, there's a little field for that too. So anyway, this is what that form looks like. Yeah, Jim.
I was just gonna ask Jennifer a quick question. What percentage of your PPI tows are releasing cars for less than full amounts?
It's not a huge percent, but it's maybe 25.
So 25, to me, that's a huge amount, 25% is, but
It's
Yeah.
it's a quite a few. I mean, a lot of people they want to do payment plans, and I can't speak for Milton City, but I know this city it's so they never have to pay. They will pay you, their $40 and then you will never see them again. So
okay.
yeah, I think uncollectible bad debt this year is really high. I mean, not for just that, but we usually have a really high uncollectible bad debt. I think over the last 2 years, we're looking at about $250,000 to $300,000 in uncollectible bad debt. And so this year is going to be, from this last year, much higher with the payment plans adding on, another $30,000 or $40,000 in uncollectible bad debt. And even if we do receive any, it's going to be 30% less with a collection agency trying to collect for us. So we'll still be down with that 30% off of what we're already not collecting.
Well, I mean, I know one of the, in the past, prior to this, I mean, even a lot of your uncollectibles were accidents where the insurance company says, oh, the vehicle isn't worth nothing. We're not paying nothing. You can keep the vehicle to the tower. Correct?
Yeah, we have a lot of our uncollectible bad debt. I wouldn't say the percentage rate of law enforcement calls that are uncollectible is not that large. It's mostly PPIs. It's non-consensuals. It's all the stuff around the city that are have been basically, they're just stripped. Nobody knows who owns them. The owner sold them years and years ago, and they just never went and titled them properly. So it's just that kind of stuff that you never see anything on, and we see a lot of that around here. So most of it's not law enforcement. Insurance comes after a lot, and most of the stuff that insurance doesn't come after or banks don't come after, we do have junkyards around here that are pick apart still, that will buy that kind of stuff. So we still make a little money on the bills. It's the PPIs that are really bad because most of them are drug cars and they're stripped cars. And so they're only for scrap metal, and scrap metal is really low. And most of them, like even catalytic converters, we used to be able to remove and sell for scrap too, but those are also very low now with scrap metal dropping. And people, they cut those off, or we have a lot of break-ins to our yard, which we try and prevent, but once in a while people do break in and steal catalytic converters and batteries. So we have that to take into consideration too, now that ever since COVID, there's a lot of crime also. So.
Okay, thank you. Joanne?
Thank you. I went back to statute, and now I remember a little bit of my circular thinking, because statute says that it also says that the vehicle owner has to sign an attestation that they owe a debt, but it also says it doesn't prohibit you from issuing a complaint. So I can see from a consumer protection perspective where and I'm not talking about Miss Henson's company, but any a towing carrier could kind of exploit that. And I had a question for you, Mr. Riley. So I know this form is required. Are there so if this happened to me and I were to sign this, and could the towing carrier put in front of me something else to sign? And does that make sense? And I might not realize I don't have to sign it, but there's kind of that balance of power. Does that make sense? Is that addressed in rule at all?
Yeah, well, so
like another
first off,
form saying you explicitly, like I'm acknowledging I have a debt or something else, or do you know what I mean? Something a scary looking form. And I'm not
Sure.
talking about like purely consensual payment plan, but even for those, are there any like parameters or you know what I mean, any kind of like guardrails in rule to protect the consumer who might not always know what their rights are and they want their car back, you know?
Sure. So yes, it is something. And again, this came from all those discussions that we were having as part of, you know, all the different public comment hearings and everything that we had, you know, over the course of the last year. We had 4 different public comment hearings. And I mean, it was people from the transportation staff that were there. You know, we had towing industry representatives there. We had association representatives. We had community interest groups that were present. We had state legislators that came and testified. I mean, it was very in depth and we covered a lot of aspects. But yeah, no, we developed what I thought is a pretty decent 60. Well, so it's under our rule 6512, specifically 6512L. And what it states is under L4, it says a towing carrier must strictly comply with this rule and shall not impose any additional obligations or requirements as a condition of releasing the motor vehicle on the vehicle owner or authorized operator. So basically, we made it clear it's this form, the payment, and that's it. Like that's the only things that basically those are the only conditions that have to be met to release the vehicle. Again, as long as we're assuming the person coming to collect the vehicle is the right person. So again, as long as those 2 criteria is met, they pay whatever that reduced fee is, and they fill out the form. That's the only thing that the towing carrier can use as conditions for release, essentially. So anything beyond that is not appropriate, is how we've interpreted this. So that's what's going into the rule. So not yet, but we're close.
May I just make one more comment on the topic and then I'll,
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to lead us down to a rabbit hole. I did want to say that I do think that what Miss Henson brought up is really valid. So thank you for bringing that up. And I don't know if this is outside of our auspices in terms of recommendations and if this is kind of going too far, but while it might seem counterintuitive, I wonder, just putting it out there, like if it actually offers more protection to the consumer, if the towing operator can charge a limited set late fee. Does that make sense?
So you think there should be some kind of a fee that the towing carriers can charge
Well,
on top of the balance?
yeah, I don't think they should be able to send you to collections and charge a fee, and then you've got the fee on top of the collections, you know, like that kind of domino effect. But what I'm saying is like, I think I don't know. I just think it's something worth exploring or just processing, right? Because like it might actually be better for the consumer to work that out, have that relationship directly with the towing carrier, but that would still have to be regulated by the PUC in terms of like the maximum fees and such. And I've had my car towed before. I've never been in this situation, so I don't know what it would look like if I got an angry looking letter from a debt collector for a tow. You know, I remember being a college kid and getting very angry, scary looking letters because I had a $200 like doctor's bill or that was due or something. So I don't know what that experience is like, but I'm just thinking again from that consumer perspective. I wonder if you know, like the state didn't like kind of create a situation they were trying to prevent. And I don't know what the answer is, but maybe it actually would be appropriate to allow a towing carrier to charge like a set specific regulated fee, you know, for non-payment after a certain period. Because, you know, again, the further you remove the collector from the PUC or even the towing carrier, I think just the greater chance there are for that consumer to be harmed, even if it's not the towing carrier doing the harm, right? Because does that make sense? Because I mean, I think, you know, when it comes to like civil court procedures and you know, and debt collection, Um, I I have less concern in that area than I do with collection agencies, if that makes sense. And so anyway, I just think it's something that we should consider if it's not too far out of bounds, kind of what that big picture looks like, so that because ultimately, like, the process should be as fair as possible to all interested parties. And when someone is towed, the interested parties, might be a landowner, but it's the person who owns the car and the towing carrier. So when you add other interested parties, particularly if there's a financial incentive, I just feel like from the consumer protection standpoint, there is more risk to the consumer, particularly if that third party, the debt collector, is going to be outside of the bounds of what the the commission does. Does that kind of make sense? So.
Well,
Anyway.
and I guess the way I kind of imagine, and again, this is based on all the feedback I've heard on this mechanism over the past, 2 years. And Ms. Henson, I'd love to have you jump in just a second here on this, because I'm sure you have a response. But yeah, I kind of imagined the way this would work out, especially after receiving all the feedback from some of the state legislators and all the public feedback we got on this particular issue based on all the public comment hearings we had last year, is that basically the way it could shake out is if somebody comes and gets a vehicle released under this mechanism, the towing carrier could certainly encourage, the setting up of a payment plan right then and there, one that they both are on board with, they both agree to. They can't mandate it. If the person says, nope, not doing anything, I'm not setting them anything up right now, just give me the vehicle and I'll be on my way, then you can't hinder that. If they have that smaller amount of money to cover that fee and they sign the form, then really that's the only two things that the towing carrier can hold as a condition of release, and then they'll have to release it that way. But kind of as part of encouraging them to kind of set up a payment plan or something, they could basically be like, well, we can set up a payment plan now, and we can just get this taken care of. Or if I think the time period we put in the rule is 90 days. If after 90 days, we're not seeing any movement on this, I'm going to have to go that other route. I'm going to have to get a debt collector. I'm going to have to, file some kind of a court proceeding. That's going to come inherently with additional potential fees and percentages and interest and all of that. Maybe your credit score is going to take a hit, those kind of things. So that's, I guess, how I kind of imagined it happening. But go ahead, Ms. Henson.
So is it the 90 days that is when they have to make a payment or do something within 90 days? I haven't really found a place that it gives me a time frame
and
when
right.
they actually are defaulted. So that I go to collections because I feel it's a really, really gray area. I'm not sure when they're late. I'm not sure when they are defaulted. I don't know what I can do to collect. Can I go to their work? Can I call them? If I call more than 3 times, am I harassing? How many letters can I actually send? I mean,
Sure.
I don't know where my boundary lines are, so it scares me to even get into that area. So I'm trying to find a collections agency because they know how to do that way better than my lines are not drawn out for me, and I don't understand where I am on this. And then I have also, how many times can they do a payment plan? I've had people that are defaulted on their first payment plan and then get the same vehicle or another vehicle impounded again, haven't paid on their first payment plan, and come in and do a second payment plan. And then they want to get it out and they haven't done anything on their first one. So how many times can they do this without paying anything? I did call the PUC and ask them. They said I was the first person to ever have this happen. But I've had that probably 3 or 4 times now where the same person keeps getting their same stuff impounded and then never pays. So it's such a gray area to me. I don't really know where to go.
So I heard 2 questions. So I'll answer the first one first, which is we got a lot of feedback on that issue of, so are we supposed to send out a bill without a deadline date on it? Like, how's that supposed to work? Like, that was some concern. And I guess some towing carriers were struggling with even pursuing the debt collection and the court action avenues because there's no deadline. And so, you know, I mean, I even made a comment. I said, well, you know, I don't know if I've ever seen a bill without a due date on it. Like I don't know that I've ever seen one. And so that's why we specifically put this new 90-day window in the rule, which seemed to be, you know, supported by the towing industry, you know, during our hearings when we were considering that change. So that's how we put it in there, and that's how it's going to go into the rule. You know, once they take effect, probably here in the next, you know, month or so. But anyway, so yeah, basically what it says is the remaining balance owed to the towing carrier shall be due no sooner than 90 days. So technically, we're essentially creating, you know, almost like a dead period. But it looks like we're kind of indicating it can be pursued through those other avenues after that 90-day window, which is why in my example from earlier, I indicated, yeah, you know, you encourage them to set up a payment plan, but you can also at that same time let them know, you know, after 90 days, if we're not seeing any movement, we're going to have to go this other route, and we're going to have to pursue things a little more officially, and you might not like it, you know. So, but anyway, that's kind of how I imagine that shaking out, which is why we put it in the rule that way, because we were getting a lot of complaints about that it just wasn't contemplated one way or another in the statute. So this is why we have rule makings, to kind of cover some of these areas that aren't covered. So so we did put that in rule. It will go into rule that way. And I haven't heard anybody tell me that there's any problems with it. So I'm assuming that'll help people out. On to your other question about, you know, multiple instances. I mean, I think the way the statute is set up and how our rules clarifying some of the process, it seems to be contemplated on a case-by-case basis. So I don't know that you can really streamline 2 or 3 together. It's almost like every tow is considered its own singular event and is subject to the same coverage under this provision. At least that's how I look at it. So yeah, I definitely can see the argument of, hey, this guy's done this 3-4 times. Like, when can I say no? I don't know that you can ever say no. Like, this is the mechanisms that's in place for it. Now, not to say you can't individually or maybe even collectively pursue those balances in these external manners that we've discussed. But yeah, in regard, I don't know if just the fact that they've done it once or twice already is grounds enough to say, well, I'm not doing it a third time. I don't know that that's available under the current framework.
Okay.
Dr. Pierce.
This has been a rabbit hole, but I think a really nice one. But I was hoping to make what I hope is a reasonable proposal that consolidates a lot of the comments. One is that it sure seems like with the bad debt that has to be written off, with the administrative costs of processing delayed payments and payment plans and follow-ups with payment plans that aren't fulfilled and so on, that there is a valid extra cost that the release upon non-full payment provision creates. And I'm seeing 2 routes right now that we've discussed. One was just briefly that the base rates that are allowed to be charged, that are currently, you know, what we're basing things on. It seems to me like there's a valid reason for asking for those to go up, to basically account for this one-time extra across the board set of expenses. That's one route, and I wanted to just note that route, what that does is it distributes the cost of these non-full payments across the board to everybody, whether or not they pay in full upon release or not, and also whether or not they're paying their bills on time. So it's, in a way, it's kind of distributing the cost in a way that isn't really fair. The other route that was proposed by Ms. Rusha is to allow the charging of a fee, a late fee, for example, and perhaps maybe allowing that there be some kind of a payment plan as part of the release, so that there is a contract and that the contract has some clear terms. And with that, the contract and the late fees being allowed, that may actually reduce the net cost of processing these debts, for one. So reducing the amount that would be feasibly put into the across the board hikes. And second of all, it would distribute some of the costs onto the bad actors rather than distributing it across the board. And then finally, to address Ms. Ruscha's point, it may be relatively protected too, because you've got this upfront incentive that prevents the debt collection agency from going forward. And so you're handling that potential really serious consequences as well by allowing this. So that was what I think I heard, and the kinds of attractiveness of this latter part. And I'm wanted to finish up with our mandate just as a task force, whether it's in our purview to make this kind of more complex recommendation. One, would be something like, it's okay to raise rates across the board to handle this extra cost, but we would prefer that the following were allowed: that fees could be charged with clear enough contracts. So that's basically the summary. Was hoping from Ms. Ruscha and Ms. Henson whether that actually captured some of the concerns too.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, I just need to kind of like process and go back and look at, what statute says, regarding debt collection agencies. But I wonder, well, the only concern I have right now is like, if it kind of has to go both ways, right? Like if the towing operator, is not paid their legally owed debt, right? Then they have a grievance, right? But if somebody is towed improperly or outside of the bounds of a law, they also have, a grievance. And that has, that they have to also be afforded some sort of remedy. And yes, they could go, through a civil proceeding. And I know that like that piece, that regulatory question in terms of enforcement is not really in our purview unless it's specifically asked, but so I would just kind of like offer, despite what I just said, I'm still a little bit hesitant because it should be fair both ways. That being said, maybe in rule there could be some language that says, and obviously, Mr. Riley, you would draft it much nicer than I could, but essentially that, like if the, vehicle owner and the towing carrier, enter into an agreement, yada, 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 then like the towing carrier may charge, insert boundary here. Does that make sense? And just kind of have that if, and make it just very clear that it would have to be completely consensual and not obligatory. But anyway, I do think though that, fair is fair, and some, and we do need to consider, like the interested parties, and then who potentially is aggrieved if one party, does not follow through.
Yeah, where my head keeps going, and I know, Ms. Henson, you want to talk anyway, but my question is actually for you, which is, it sounds like kind of the motivation here is to encourage the people who are getting their vehicles released through this mechanism to work directly with the towing carrier and not go as far as to having to enlist, debt collectors and have to go through all the pain and the, everything associated with, dealing with the court system. They'd rather just set up something that both sides agree to and just do it. Like, it sounds like that's kind of the motivation behind all this. So I guess my question for you, Ms. Henson, would be, do you think that's something that will be more receptive to the vehicle or whoever's the vehicle is being released to, if there's some kind of extra fee tacked on top, or through the scenario we discussed earlier in the meeting where you basically just say, hey, your bill's $250, you pay me $50 a month over the next 5 months and we'll call it good. Like, what do you think would be more encouraging to the consumer to engage with you in that kind of a discussion versus potentially saying, well, you owe me the $250 plus an extra, whatever, $50, let's say, or you can wait the 90 days and then I go to a debt collector or I file something in civil court against you. Like, I guess I'm curious what you think would be something that, again, would encourage them to interact with you as opposed to going those external routes. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, if I have to charge them a fee to do it for 90 days, they're not going to pay me regardless if I charge them a fee or not charge them a fee. The ones that aren't going to pay are just never going to pay. I don't know how to collect from them. They're just not going to pay. The only thing I have found that works at all is that if they owe $500 and they want to do a payment plan, I know right then when they say that, and I'm never going to see them again, and I'm not going to be able to find them, and I will never see the money. So I will say, well, how about this? How about instead of doing a payment plan, you can pay me $200 and then that's it. And you're done. Like, I'll just cut the bill down to $200 and they'll go, oh, okay. And they'll give me $200 and I don't have to do a payment plan. And I gave them 65% off of their bill, which then I have a happy customer and I don't have to go looking for them, or I don't even know how to do that. So that's the only thing I've found that works, is just to offer them a huge discount and say, if you just do one payment now instead of, payments for the next 9 months, then I'll just call it good. And they will always do that. So I don't think offering them, 90 days out and you get a fee, $75 for using the payment plan, I don't think I'll ever see any money. I think the only reason is debt collectors. It's the only way to find people and get them to pay, because people eventually want to buy a house or eventually want to buy a car, because it seems like in the future they want to do something, so they have to clear up their issues. Right now they do not care. So I don't see money usually. I mean, with debt collectors in the past, I haven't seen money for a couple of years, and then eventually they want to clear things up, so they have to pay it. So it takes, the people who we tow in non-consensually usually don't care right now about buying a car, buying a house, or any of those things. They're just kind of running around causing a muck. But in the future, they usually do. And so that's kind of where I see it, is if we charge them more in this moment in their life, they're not going to care to do a payment plan with me. Debt collectors, they track them around for a long time. So that's kind of my opinion on that.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know that there would be, again, as long as you're doing what you explained just a second ago, in a way where, again, you're not hindering them wanting to get the vehicle released for that lesser fee. Like, it's like, you want to go that option, we'll go that option and we'll just do it. But if you want, here's an alternative. I'll just cut your bill in half and you pay the whole thing now, or that half now, and then we're square. And they're like, oh yeah, let's do that. At that point, it sounds like they've abandoned invoking that other mechanism, and now they're going with what you're offering on the table. And again, that seems reasonable to me. I don't think that would conflict with anything, as long as they're the one electing to opt into that option.
Right.
So, okay, I understand what you mean. Okay.
Yeah, I give them, multiple options. They can do whatever they would like.
Sure.
Just when they see a 50% discount, it seems like that's my best bet, just because then they are really happy with us. They feel like they got a great deal and I don't have to follow somebody around. So it works. I'm happy. They're happy. Even if it's half, it's still good to me. And plus, people, if they need their vehicles, I will make anybody a deal. I give people deals all the time. I am not one that wants to keep your car. I don't want to keep your belongings. I would like for you to have your stuff. I'd like you, for you to take your kids back and forth and go to the store. I don't want to keep your stuff. So even if they have whatever, I make people deals all the time. So if it's half, that's great. If it's if they say, I mean, I always say, well, what can you do? Like they always say, well, what's the bill? And I say, well, it's $300. Well, I don't have that. Well, what do you have? What could you do? And they'll say like $150. Okay, that's totally fine. Like I take pretty much whatever, because I don't want to chase people around, and I don't want, we're not in the business to, you know, take people's only car away. That's not what we're trying to do. So I'm good with half price or a quarter price, really.
Michael?
Thanks. I was actually hoping to pursue just a quick procedural question and then see if we can move in that direction if we need to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Was I right in thinking that the CPI is about to kick in and to change the rates? So I knew that's coming up. Do we have the actual ability as a task force to weigh in and change what is about to go into effect, or is our recommendation going to be something that basically isn't going to kick in for another year? Because if we're weighing in on something that's about to happen and can change what's about to happen, I think we should really focus on that. But if it's just pay attention, it's about to come up and it's a topic we've been discussing, then we can talk at more leisure over a few months. So quick decision. Should we be focusing on that just to get?
Yeah, it wouldn't,
place?
whatever idea or whatever recommendation or whatever we may come up with in regards to the inflation adjustment mechanism. Yeah, I think it would be more from a global perspective, just determining, one, if we as a task force think it's a good idea for the commission to be entertaining that kind of a mechanism, first off. And then second, is the current metric being used the best one to use? Like, I really do think it boils down to just those two more simplistic concepts. But yeah, I mean, even if we were to put a recommendation in front of the commission today, like if we had a nice, 1, 2 page, 3, 5, 10, whatever page report that outlined, why we think or don't think, that the CPI or using some kind of a metric to annually adjust the tow rates is a good idea. Maybe we do think it's a good idea, or maybe we don't think it's a good idea. I can't say, but that would be the first part of that recommendation is one, if we think it's a good idea or not a good idea. And then second, is the CDOLA CPI that the commission has been using for the last few years, is that still the correct one? So either we think it's, maybe we do think it's still the best one, or maybe we don't, and we think another one is, and we'd have to explain why we thought that other one was a better one. We'd essentially have to make the case before the commission or in our recommendation to the commission that we think some alternative is the better option, and why. Why do we think it's the better option? But even if we had all that done and in a nice clean report today to offer to the commission, what the commission would do is they would take it and they'd probably review it, and they would take it under consideration and then decide, one, if they wanted to proactively do something based on that recommendation, or, and I think more likely, they'd include it in the next rulemaking that specifically addresses the rates. And so maybe that happens in a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year. It's hard to say when the next one will be. So that's essentially how that would happen. So I guess I look at that issue more as a global perspective, where we're weighing in on the concept. Like we're not trying to swoop in at the last second and change what is already established procedure that the commission is following, which again, that's going to kick in later this week. So I don't think there's anything we could do to stop it, even if we wanted to. But that's not to say that we can't still continue to explore this idea and, do some additional research on some of these metrics that we covered earlier, and come up with some kind of a conclusion. Again, maybe the conclusion will be, we think the annual inflation adjustment mechanism is good and it's working well. Yeah, maybe the inflation over the last few years has been, way higher than normal. But in general, we like the concept and we think the commission should keep doing it. Maybe that's what the recommendation would be. And then the second part of the recommendation is, but we we don't think the CPI CDOLA is the right one to use. instead, we've done some, research, and we think this one fits better, and this is how the commission can apply it, and this is why it's the better option. Or maybe it's status quo. Yeah, we think actually we've done some comparisons to other metrics, and we do think the CDOLA one is the best one. It seems to be the most even keel of all the different ones that we've seen. So maybe that's the recommendation, is that, things just keep going the way they're going now. So it's hard to say without consensus from the towing task force what that recommendation would be. But again, to your question, I don't think, it's something where we need to put some huge rush on it because, the commission's about to do something. No, the commission's going to do what they're going to do regardless of what we're talking about, until we have an official recommendation in front of them, and they take whatever steps they need to officially address it and potentially respond to it in a way that is going to potentially change how they're doing things. So kind of a long way to answer your question, but
Okay.
oh, sorry, Michael.
Also, just the reason for asking it was a follow up, just because I'm hearing a dynamic that I'm very concerned about, and also as being on the task force as another consumer rep. I'm seeing a dynamic that just really strikes me as something that it would be good for us to reduce if possible. But part of it is that the costs are going up, and if they're being shifted onto the consumer, they're ending up having to pay bills that most of them can't pay, and so the pricing right now that the consumer has to bear, we really have to do something about it. And that was what was initially I was trying to address by the shared system, where the landlords who are calling in the tows are paying part of it, and the towee is paying part of it, and that way both the towers' costs are covered, and we're also providing a little disincentive for hair trigger towing. But there's a worry that currently with the CPI bumping up because of COVID, that we're just fueling this really bad dynamic of charging more than what the towees can cover. And so I was actually hoping to head that off if we possibly could, just to not to put more fuel on a fire that's burning through things and is leading to counter legislation that may not be really serving anybody. So that's just a comment where I'm headed with this. Just, I think the CPI as it's currently being used is reasonable. I think there should be it should be a running average so that we're avoiding spikes. And I think there should be exceptions for things like COVID, where you're getting a big bump. That's going to have adverse effects generally.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Ms. Ruscha.
Thanks, Mr. Riley. So I hate to get us in a meta rabbit hole, but there is the concept that if something looks insurmountable, then people are less likely to try to solve it, right? So if and this also becomes a business question as well for the towing carrier. If the fees, right now they might be too high, and that kind of from a psychological perspective, especially for a lower income, customer, they might say like, well, I'm never going to be able to pay that off, right? Or that would take me months. And then so they just put it aside. And then you get into the situation that Miss Henson was describing. And she kind of touched on that when she said, well, how about $100, because that is something that the consumer can take care of it. And so, I don't know, and we don't have enough data, but there is the possibility that the fees right now, combined with the release of vehicle provision, could create a situation where that's more likely to, where it's more likely to happen. Does that make sense? Because, and if that's the case, that would suggest that the fees were already too high. And then another thing I was thinking of is like, and this is not this is not a criticism of you, Ms. Henson, or what you are doing, because I see where you're coming from, but I'm thinking of like a different company, right, that might not have that perspective, and then they improperly towed somebody, and they just are incentivized to cut a deal because that now there's less likely to be a complaint or whatever, right? Does that make sense? I mean, I think one of the reasons why we have that provision that says that, the rates are set, by the PUC, was supposed to like even the playing field, or, take the question out. So anyway, I don't know if that's like too far out of our purview, that the second piece, right? Because I'm thinking like, let's say I get towed and I know for sure the operator, like it was improper, they didn't follow the rules, whatever. I'm like hopping mad. And then the operator is like, well, if you give me $75, we'll call it good. I might, make that's a decision as a consumer. Like I might say, whatever, I'm just going to pay you $75 because I don't want to potentially have to deal with the debt collection agency, or I don't have to file a complaint with the PUC, or does that make sense? And they're just like, I think you're wrong, but it's easier for me to just pay. That's also, that's also a situation that folks can get in. And I'm not saying that's the case with Ms. Henson's company, but I could also see that being exploited as well. So maybe that second component is not something that we deal with, but if we are able to get more data, or continue this conversation a little bit more, I think it's worth exploring, to the best that we could assess. Just the question, like, is a combination of the fees being here, right, and increasing, plus that, that provision that someone can have their vehicle released, with a much lesser payment, and knowing who's more likely to get towed. It's going to be a lower income person for a non-consensual tow. Is that just kind of creating that perfect storm? But does it also suggest that the current rates are too high? So anyway, I apologize for that extra meta rabbit hole, but I think this is a really good conversation. And again, I really appreciate Ms. Henson's feedback and that experience as a business owner, because it was helpful for me to process all that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I think that the prices right now are not too high. I think people they don't like to pay for their car to be impounded and to get out of impound. It's not fun. We live in Colorado. We have a lot of like dispensaries and things like that. People don't have a problem paying for those kind of things. They walk into a dispensary and drop $250, but they do have a problem paying for their vehicles to get out of impound. I think it's choice. That what they think is fun to spend money on more than. I get some of the low incomes do have a hard time, and those are the ones that we make deals with all the time. They are a percentage of what gets towed, but not all of it. I think most of the people, what you described was like, oh, I got my car towed and I was in the right, I wasn't in the wrong. That's a lot of people's reaction when they get their car towed. Like, even if they are in front of a dumpster, they feel like since they live in the building that they should be able to be there, even though the trash couldn't be picked up for the day. They were tired because they were sleeping and they shouldn't have been bugged. And since they didn't move it, they got towed, and they say, well, but I live here. It's a lot of entitlement more than that. So I don't think people really, I don't think it's too high. I don't think it needs to be a ton higher. But I don't think it's too high for the cost of living in the city. And for equipment wise, I purchased a truck this year and it was $180,000 for one rollback. Last year I purchased a truck and it was $120,000. That's, a $50,000 increase for one rollback tow truck, just a light duty truck in Colorado in a difference of like a year and a half. So everything has increased tremendously on our side of cost too. Like parts are 4 times what they used to be if you can even get them for your trucks. So, I mean, workman's compensation is extremely high. Insurance, you know, has at least doubled, if not more than that, for our trucks and our yards for the year. So for us to knock prices down on our side, it's really, really difficult because all of our stuff is so expensive and people don't look at the towing industry as a pricey industry because we don't really have big buildings or any kind of crazy establishments where you go into and purchase things. So they always go, whoa, why is that so expensive? They don't look at anything that goes into the towing industry to make it function, including, I mean, just fuel. I pay over $4,000 a week, usually just in fuel. So they're just very expensive on our end too. So I don't think people see that because you don't get to walk into our store and pick things off of the shelf. So it's a little bit of a different scenario on our side, if that helps.
Yeah, thanks for that additional perspective, Ms. Henson. I guess my comment is somewhere a little in between, you know, both sides of this conversation, which is, you know, even if the commission reduced the price of a tow all the way down to $100 or like $150, people would still get really upset about it. I mean, it's yes, it's the fee, and especially for some groups and some people, that monetary obligation is a lot. I absolutely recognize that. But I also think at the same time, for a lot of people, it's not just the fact that you have to pay money for something. It's the inconvenience surrounding the entire event. Mm-hmm. It's a vehicle that's yours, that you rely upon to get you here and there, maybe to your job, maybe to the store, maybe to do a doctor's appointment. But you know, and now it's gone, and now you need to get it back. And so it's the whole inconvenience factor. I think that at times can be more, you know, of a contributing factor to why people get so upset about it. Mm-hmm. And I understand why. I mean, again, I totally recognize why people get so upset about it. I would be upset about it. But at the same, I mean, I guess I look at it, you know, as if like a pipe burst at your house. Same concept. Oh, something happened that I wasn't expecting. It's going to be an inconvenience. I'm going to have to pay money. This is a terrible situation. Like, that's just how people look at this kind of stuff when it happens. And so, you know, as long as we're kind of keeping that in the back of our minds as well when we're having these discussions, I think we can ultimately get to the right place. We are coming up on time. Anybody else maybe who hasn't spoken a lot today, who wants to jump in? Officer Prunski or anyone else? If you had any thoughts, I know we've kind of gone around a bit on some of these topics, but yeah, just one last opportunity to jump in before we adjourn for the day. Anybody else have any other comments? Okay. Well, hearing none, we'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Our next meeting will be scheduled for, we'll keep to the second Wednesday of the month moving forward, unless there's any changes or we need to adjust in some way. But I think we can kind of just keep that our standard for the time being, at least until maybe things change. But so that would put our next meeting on April 10th, Wednesday, April 10th, 2 to 4, same time range. Hadija will send out an invite here probably before the end of the week with that invite. Anything else anybody wants to cover today? And feel free, everybody. I know we talked quite a bit about the CPI stuff. Again, if you want to do your own research on some of this stuff, again, we were looking at the what was it? Sorry, I jumped around quite a bit on this one. It was where is it? Personal consumption expenditures price index and the producer price index, which is through the BLS. So if you want to, if you have some extra time before our next meeting or whenever, and you want to jump around there and kind of poke around in the data and see if you see some overlays to the information or whatever that you think could be helpful to, our continuing discussions on this topic, I think that would be great. So, if you feel like you have time to do that, yeah, I think that would well serve the task force and as we continue to talk about this. So, All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate your time. It's about 4 p.m. now, and we'll go ahead and adjourn. See everybody on April 10th. Thank you.
Thank you.